Hello noble ones, this is my reaction and commentary to an episode on History Hit, where Honor Cargill Martin, who is an ancient historian, is reviewing Life of Brian. You'll notice that the jump cuts will be a little abrupt during this episode. That is because I had to try and dodge any DMCA that would have resulted from showing any footage of the movie. A more complete version will be soon posted for members, as it won't matter that it will get copyright claimed since member posts are not made to make revenue anyways, but just as a way to say thank you to everyone who is a member of the channel. And for everyone else, this is still a really good video, regardless of the cuts. Enjoy.
Pontius Pilate does seem to have quite a predilection, if we believe our sources, for unnecessary violence. I don't think my Latin teacher would have let me off this easily.
What is a
Nuts actually almost certainly would have been on offer. Roads was probably the first thing that the Romans would do whenever they arrived in a new province. Hi, I'm Honor Cargill Martin. I am an ancient historian, and today we're going to be doing a deep dive into the life of Brian. If you've watched it, you know that this is a very serious historical drama about resistance to Roman rule in Judea. I am obviously an ancient historian, not a biblical scholar, so we're going to be focusing very much on the Roman history aspects of this.
She's really good, by the way.
So we're in Judea in AD 33. Judea is a Jewish kingdom in the Middle East. It was ruled by King Herod the Great until his death in 4 BC, at which point it was split into 3 kingdoms, which were given to his 3 sons to rule as client kings for the Romans. One of them really begins to mess up, and so he is deposed by the Romans in 6 AD and replaced by a direct Roman rule.
She said AD. Based.
And who is ruling for the Romans at this point is the Roman prefect, and he is called Pontius Pilate.
My gosh, the armor. But then again, it's an old one.
So it says we're in the Colosseum in Jerusalem. We're not in the Colosseum in Jerusalem. The Colosseum is the name of the great amphitheater in Rome. We are, however, in an amphitheater, which is a form of Roman entertainment space that has kind of an oval stage and then seating the whole way round. It's used for gladiatorial combats, beast fights, mock battles, things like that.
The Colosseum in Jerusalem.
There was an amphitheater built in Jerusalem, but actually, really interestingly, it was not built by the Romans themselves. It was built by the Jewish king Herod the Great. Herod was a client king for the Romans. He had spent some time in Rome. His children were actually brought up in Rome. And so a lot of his building projects are very Roman in scope. He builds amphitheaters, he builds theaters, he builds essentially a whole new Roman city on the coast called Caesarea, which is obviously named after the emperors and includes even a temple to the emperors themselves. I also like the fact that we've got the detail of an eagle symbol up here. That is a really strong symbol of Rome. It's also a pretty problematic symbol in Jerusalem at this point. There's a major backlash when Herod puts a golden Roman eagle above the gates to the great temple in Jerusalem. I also like the detail of the little statue that we can see next to the eagle, which is the wolf suckling the twin founders of Rome, Romulus.
Seriously, YouTube, you've got to sense... I mean, I get it, but I don't at the same time. It's the ancient... Goodness gracious.
And Remus. I love the fact they've got children's matinee here. Children probably would have been attending fights in the arena. But what I would say is that we're seeing an awful
not with that level of gore.
lot of gore here, kind of hacked off limbs and heads and things like that. And whilst gladiatorial combat obviously is a very violent art form,
Right.
It's not all about kind of gory destruction. Most gladiatorial fights don't end in death. These are very highly trained fighters. You can't just be killing them off the whole time. If
Absolutely. She's absolutely right.
you are dying in the arena, you're probably dying from a much cleaner blow than this. I love that. He's just referring to one of the gladiators as the Macedonian baby smasher. And whilst I haven't come across that as a name for a gladiator, it does reflect something that the Romans did do, which was essentially brand the gladiators as having these sort of quite theatrical identities. People would have...
Yeah, this image is not great though, because this is supposed to be a retiarius, I suppose, because he's using the trident, but in reality he's dressed up like a murmillo, so that's kind of a weird... Unless he took the weapon from the retiarius, I suppose.
Favorite gladiators and really kind of follow their careers and watch them fight. Also, the reference to Macedonian is interesting. Gladiators usually are slaves, and so they can be brought from anywhere in the empire to fight somewhere completely different.
Usually, but not always. There are some gladiators that became gladiators by choice. Maybe if you were like indebted, if you had a massive debt and you're like, I don't know how to pay it, you just go and become a gladiator. It didn't happen very often, but it did happen. Of course, she only said often, so she's correct.
You certainly do get instances in which gladiators that are armed to different extents are put up to fight against one another. But the ideal is always that it is essentially a fair fight, because that makes it much more fun for the audience to watch.
This was actually a combination. The idea of a retiarius, he would have still a little protection, but yeah, net and trident, versus a big guy who would also have a shield called a murmillo, who was a heavy class gladiator. They were often matched. Not always. Sometimes he's a retiarius against secutor. That's another one, another type, the one with the smooth kind of brass or bronze helmet with the two eyes like this. That was in fact an optimized. Let me tell you this much. The reason why they changed the pairing, the matching between that used to be Retiarius versus Murmillo and then it becomes Retiarius versus Secutor, is because basically in gaming sense, they nerfed it. Because the problem was that the helmet of the Murmillo, which represents the fish, right? Because the Murmillo is the fish. That's why the Murmillo is fighting against the Retiarius, who is the fisherman. There is a symbolism there. So the helmet is representing the fish, and he has these... I'm sure you've seen them, kind of similar to this, but this looks horrible, whatever. The problem is that the net would get caught on the helmet very easily, which made it relatively easy really simple for the Retiarius to control and make it a problem for the Murmillo to fight in a natural way. And that was seen as unbalanced by the Romans. This is a game, right? Gladiatorial games. Hence, just like we do in modern gaming and we nerf stuff with a patch, they patched it and they took the Secutor, who is pretty much dressed and armed like a Murmillo, but his helmet is optimized because it's oval and it's smooth so that the net doesn't catch that easily. That's what happened, and it's fascinating. She's wearing purple,
okay,
man.
So
that
we
would be.
See this group of very well-dressed attendees all sitting together in essentially the good seats at the front, and that was certainly something that happened. Suddenly, in the Colosseum in Rome, the best seats were reserved for the imperial family, for visiting dignitaries, for the Vestal Virgins,
patricians.
And the kind of best layers of seating were reserved for the senators and then for the wealthy equestrian. And we can also hear this really kind of rowdy booing and cheering, and that was suddenly a huge component of any form of spectacle in the ancient world. So these sorts of spectacles were actually seen as a place for kind of communication between the people and their rulers. By booing or cheering, the people could let the emperor know what they thought of them at any given time.
Look at that scale. Hey guys, this is exactly what I did when I played Oblivion. I maneuvered around and the guys were running after me, chasing me. That's so fun. It's exactly what I did. True.
So here we meet our protagonist, Brian, who is a local Judean man who is currently selling snacks, pretty unappetizing ones, in the amphitheater.
Unappetizing? Oh yeah, in the movie, yeah. So the fact that they would have lunch breaks is actually documented in the sources. They would. And then not only they would eat probably good stuff, in this case it's funny of course, but they would eat stuff that would be great for the Romans. Then what would happen is that during these lunch breaks, to still entertain the public, they would have sometimes gladiatrix, so female gladiators. Other times they would have maybe more choreographed fights as well.
Wolf nipple chits. Yeah, he's not selling them. So I think this is meant to be kind of weird Roman delicacies. I haven't come across any of those particular ones in my research. The Romans obviously did have some delicacies that we would now view as very strange. They loved a stuffed dormouse.
Ostrich.
They ate ostrich.
Max Miller, my man, you've been summoned.
They thought that those were kind of great exotic dishes. I don't think those sorts of dishes would have been on offer in an arena like this. They were much more the preserve of elite banquets. Food, however, was a really important part of the spectacles, and it would very often be given out for free by the sponsor of the games.
Absolutely.
So we have references to people being given bread, wine,
bread and circuses, am I right?
Biscuits, kind of honey cakes by the emperor as they watch the games that he's put on for them.
Lots, please. Got any nuts? I haven't got any nuts, sorry.
Nuts actually almost certainly would have been on offer in the Colosseum. Archaeologists have found evidence of kind of nuts, dates, things like that.
It may, all right. I love it.
So there was a lot of resistance to Roman rule in this period.
Accent.
When Herod dies, there is
Yeah.
a serious uprising that has to be put down by the governor of Syria.
And then there's one in 70 AD.
Then when one of Herod's sons is deposed in 6 AD and replaced with direct Roman rule, there is another rebellion because that involves direct Roman taxation, which the Jews find very hard to stomach, not only because obviously no one enjoys being taxed, but also because this is such a clear indicator that now they are being ruled by the Romans,
Foreign
and there is this
power.
belief that obviously the Jews should ultimately be subject to no one but God.
The whole taxation with the Jews is actually quite complicated. It is a very deep topic. I mentioned it a little bit on a separate video. I might actually talk about it a little more on another video once again, because the whole thing with taxation, Romans and Jews is complex.
It's hard to pinpoint sometimes the exact cause of resistance in Judea in this period because a lot of it is probably about Roman rule. There are some points where something, for example, that Pontius Pilate does very directly.
Oh, by the way, see, I like the way she says, because I'm sorry that I'm interrupting her, but I did want to say something about Pontius Pilate. So I'll let her finish and then I'll tell you something.
Leads to resistance. But there is also a socioeconomic element to it, with a sort of fissure between the elites and the non-elites within Judean society itself, particularly as the Judean elites aligned themselves increasingly with Hellenistic and with Roman culture.
So yeah, the idea of Pontius Pilate being a tyrant, it depends. Like we do think that it's very likely. He's a historical figure, by the way, 100%, because there is a stele that mentions him by name from the Roman period in association with the governorship of Judea, which at this time was becoming a sort of a prefecture of the province of Syria, if I am correct. We'll see if she says it, otherwise I'll Google it. But I do think I'm correct. So it wasn't its own thing. And when it comes to his ability to govern, it's true. She did mention it at the beginning, and then I forgot to say it. It's true that he's mentioned by some Jewish sources as someone who was really hated by the people, to the point that he was even chastised by the emperor himself for how he was behaving. But then there are other sources that can't counter that. So we don't know. Maybe it was exaggerated a little bit. We don't exactly. We do know that he was trying everything he could to try to keep the people at peace. It's kind of counterintuitive then to think, why would he like disrespect them and put a Roman symbol in a position where he knows that the people are going to be mad about it. So we don't know how much of that we can actually believe. But it is interesting, the figure of Pontius Pilate, totally. Right.
So we're seeing the People's Front of Judea plotting to overthrow Roman rule.
It is entire apparatus of the Roman state.
The thing is, there actually isn't that much apparatus of the Roman imperialist state in Judea at this point. Pontius Pilate is ruling from the new city Caesarea on the coast.
Oh, Caesarea,
but what does that really mean?
Caesarea.
He has a small number of soldiers. He doesn't even have a full garrison. His main role is really dispensing justice. For the majority of crimes, he is the only person who can give out a capital sentence. But apart from that, almost all the administration of Judea is left to the local elites. And this is really the Romans' modus operandi across almost all of their empire. I think it's really key to their imperial success. They let the people govern themselves as much as they possibly can, because they know that that is going to create both less work and less problems for them. Well, that's certainly not true, because there has only been a Roman governor in Judea for about 27 years at this point. Before that, the Romans are only involved as being the kind of protectors of the local client kings.
Protectorate.
Pontius Pilate actually did build an aqueduct. He extended it all the way into Jerusalem, and it causes a huge political problem for him. The population are not grateful. In fact, they rebel because it transpires that he has used some of the temple's funds to complete this project.
Yeah, sanitation. They're a bit cockney, aren't they? You remember what this city used to be like? Yeah, give me some sanitation.
Roads was probably the first thing that the Romans would do whenever they arrived in a new province, because you need to be able to move your troops around.
Absolutely.
If you find that there is something unrest in one part of your province and the imperial governor can't get to it to put it down, then there's no point having an imperial governor at all. So the building of good, straight, well-maintained roads is completely characteristic of Roman imperial policy. So with things like irrigation and medicine, the thing is that before the Romans arrived, the Jews were not savage barbarians, unlike, say, the Brits were. They had been living in a society that was sandwiched between sometimes rule.
Yeah, I would say even the Celtic populations, I mean, they're savage from the perspective of the Romans, but they did have their own systems, not as organized as the Romans. But yeah, she's really good. We have already reviewed her once. Classes is Honor Cargill Martin, or Cargill. Honor Cargill Martin. Delves into the iconic, yeah. Very nice. So that's her name, presenter.
Ruled by these great Hellenistic empires. And so they really already had access to parts of Greek culture, Greek learning. Certainly the elites had already been building homes in Greek style. And so when the Romans arrived, a lot of these elements of what we would see as being civilization would already have been in place. And in terms of education, Judaism is a religion that has always had a huge emphasis on education.
Yeah.
The Judean elites would also have been educated in the Greek language and Greek culture. And so the Romans are not going to view these people as kind of ill-educated, unurbanized savages. I think they had wine before.
Yeah, of course they had wine before. There is the whole turning water into wine, but still it's funny.
I think they had wine before the Romans. The Romans wouldn't really have been doing much to keep order necessarily in the streets of Jerusalem themselves. It's a very small number of soldiers that are stationed there. And so I think the majority of responsibility for keeping order day to day would have continued to fall on local administrators.
This is, he's going to repeat everything now. I love the scene, the face on this guy. Yeah, and it is true, though, that sometimes policing jobs were done by the legionaries. Her point is correct. But I do want to underline that. You should imagine that in cities, sometimes the Roman legionaries did take care of that. Not just them, you have the vigiles, but I'm saying it does sometimes happen historically.
What I would say is, although there are some issues in terms of how they're characterizing what the Romans are doing in Judea specifically, this scene does really speak to something in wider Roman imperial policy, where they view the bringing of kind of Romanizing or civilizing aspects of life to their provinces as part of their political policy. They believe that if you offer people kind of material comforts and also things like education, what the Romans would view to be high culture, then they're going to be less likely to want to rebel against you. It's perhaps going to both...
I don't know if you guys noticed, but she has a mannerism that makes me think of Disney animation. Is it giving you that? Check the way when she speaks, check her body language. Look.
They believe that if you offer people kind of material comforts and also things like education, what the Romans would view to be high culture, then they're going to be less likely to want to rebel against you. It's perhaps going to both kind of soften their military instinct and soften their view of the Romans. I don't think my Latin teacher would have let me off this easily.
Write it 100 times. That's exactly what you shouldn't let. Oh, this is genius. This is brilliant. I did not remember that.
And the idea that he is being forced to learn Latin is an interesting one. In Judea at this point, he would probably have been speaking Aramaic day to day. And the Romans do sometimes have a policy of trying to teach their subjects Latin, but their concern is really only with the elites in any province. Yeah. So they're not going to bother about, a nobody like Brian. Also, they don't have a problem communicating with the elites in Judea.
I do think, though, they would have made sense. They would have made fun, because we do have situations where we know that the Romans made fun of people because of the way they spoke, whether it be for a foreign language, whether it be because it's an actual Roman patrician who's learning a language that the Romans consider barbaric. And so they make fun of, oh, you speak so fluently the language of the barbarians. We do have these. So I don't see it as completely improbable that someone tried to say something to the Romans, they mispronounced it, and the Romans made fun of them. Like, I can see that happening. I can absolutely see that happening. Yeah, okay, we need to watch this. Bigusticus, we cannot not watch this. So we'll watch this, then we'll stop, we'll go back to playing, but we've got to see Bigusticus, guys.
In these standards you can see behind the Roman soldiers here, I think that one of them has a image of the emperor on it. And standards like these had caused a huge political problem for Pontius Pilate when he first arrived in Judea. So one winter, possibly his first as governor of Judea, he brings a new garrison of troops to Jerusalem. And this particular garrison has images of the emperor on their legionary stand. And Pontius Pilate either doesn't realize or doesn't care that that is going to be hugely offensive to the Roman people. This is their holy city, and they think that this is kind of idolatrous. They protest against this, and eventually Pilate backs down and withdraws the troops that use that standard and replace them with one that uses a less kind of offensive type of image. Pontius Pilate here is receiving his political prisoners while he decorates his palace. And what is so interesting about this is that it actually picks up on a scene that we get from the famous Jewish historian Josephus. Josephus goes on an embassy to meet Caligula to plead for the Alexandrian Jews who are being murdered in pogroms at the time. And Caligula meets the embassy, but he won't listen to their pleas properly. Instead, he walks around his palace just outside Rome and starts making orders about the interiors. He says, what do you think about this window? Should I replace it with kind of pure quartz?
Of course, the armor looks horrendous, but it doesn't matter because in fact makes it even funnier. The columns shouldn't be pure white, we know that.
Poor Pontius Pilate, he's really depicted in this as such a kind of ridiculous weakling. That's quite in line with how he's depicted in biblical sources, who want to put the main blame for Jesus's execution on his fellow Jews. And so they depict Pontius Pilate as just being a really, really weak leader. We get quite a different image of him in the Jewish sources, who are concerned with proving that the rebellion, which breaks out in the late 60s AD, is kind of well justified by decades of Roman misrule. And
that's why I was telling you it depends, because you've got like contrasting sources. Exactly. There's a political reason behind it.
So the Pontius Pilate that appears in those works is a much stronger leader, but also a much more kind of evil and oppressive one. Pontius Pilate does seem to have quite a predilection, if we believe our sources, for unnecessary violence. When the people protest about his building of the aqueduct, it's said that he stations plainclothes police officers among the crowds and then has them, you know, beat a number of protesters to death.
Silence! What is all this insolence?
Wait. Is it getting blocked, the stream? Are you here, guys? Let me know if you can see me still on YouTube. I'll double check. 1 second. We need to check that man. Oh, the copyright. Yeah, it happens. Well, so yeah, error. Your stream has been temporarily blocked. Okay, I'll get it back. Twitch is okay. Don't worry about it. We can get it back. I mean, I'm on full screen camera now, so it should return. That's what happened last time too. Man, that's annoying because Bigoticus is the best part, but yeah, I mean, it is what it is. I'll have to finish it offline. Alright, so I tried to get it back, but unfortunately it wasn't possible, and those sections that were showing the movie were too long to be able to leave them on a video and not get a copyright claim. So I'm going to have to call it a night and call it a day for this video, but I do want to say, so Dr. Honor Cargill Martin, ancient historian, she's fantastic, excellent presenter, very good, very well prepared, no politics, no nonsense, just the facts, in a very entertaining and very charming way, the way she presents them. So I really appreciated the episode. Thank you very much. And of course, I appreciate each and every single one of you for watching until the end. Thank you, and I will see you tomorrow. And remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye.